headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
A story from this week that I feel was woefully neglected by the media, actually, partly because I think that the media, for some reason, don't want to cover this story, partly, I think, because of the shenanigans that have gone on in Downing Street. But it's about the report that came out regarding child sex abuse, grooming gangs, and staggeringly knocking on 20 years on from when this was first exposed in places like Rochdale and Rotherham, that this independent report is saying that this is still happening. There is still a political correctness. There is still a problem with mainly Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs who are exploiting children by these gangs, and that the police, various authorities are essentially turning a blind eye to it. They're not recording the ethnicity of perpetrators in order to downplay the whole thing, and that this is still going on, and it is as bad as it's ever been. And someone who has devoted her career to this, her life to this, she actually resigned when she exposed this from Greater Manchester Police, is Maggie Oliver. She joins us still here on Talk Radio. And by the way, it's the Maggie Oliver Foundation.com. If you want to go and find out more about this, you can donate on there. If you are suitable and you undergo the necessary checks, that you can offer to volunteer, and you can do a lot on there, because Maggie, you have now, this has become your sort of life's work, hasn't it? To keep exposing this.
It took over my life, really, Christo. It has, but it's not gone away. I wish it hadn't. But you know, how can we turn away from those who are completely desperate? You know, when you hear... Sorry. Well,
Russell Quirk, who joins me as a political commentator, you were talking in the last part about how you would like to see at least one of the police chiefs that has turned a blind eye to this, swept it under the carpet, put into the dock for this. Yeah, what was your suggestion about this, Russell?
Yeah, morning, Maggie. Look, thank you sincerely for the work you're doing with your foundation here. So it's no wonder that 20 years on, I suppose, this continues if no one's being held to account. And that applies not just to the paedophiles, the perpetrators, but of course the police themselves, or whoever it is that are making these outrageous and shocking decisions not to pursue these criminals, because that's what they are. And look, where those directions come from, whether it's, you know, chief police officers or police and crime commissioners now, of course, which are elected to oversee strategy and policy within police force, or whether it goes even higher than that. But I guess my question, Maggie, is why has no one ever pursued a private prosecution against a senior police officer or the CPS or Department of Public Prosecutions? Because I'd suggest that should be done. And frankly, Maggie, I would be right behind you in helping to fundraise, if necessary, for such an eventuality.
Is that possible?
Well, I would say watch this space, because I'm not dying until it's done. But the reason is, Russell, because it is so expensive. It would have to be funded. But I personally feel that the Rochdale case is the one that could do that. I mean, when you get the head of the CPS, Greg McGill, who came, I was a core participant in the IICSA inquiry, and I heard all the evidence, and it was pitiful. But, you know, the Rochdale case that I was talking about, one of the children there that was represented in the drama Three Girls, you know, she'd been abused since the age of 14. She was, you know, raped by, to my knowledge, over 20 men, probably hundreds. She spent 8 months on a daily basis with me, going to interviews, giving video interviews, going to ID parades, identifying who it was. And then 8 months in, the CPS changed their mind and decided that she was not going to be, as I say, used as a victim in court. But they didn't tell her. The CPS decided subsequently to secretly add her to the indictment as one of the gang of paedophiles as a tactical option to get her evidence into court. And then social services and police...
So they were pushing her as like a madam, weren't they? They were saying that she was But even though she was 14, which is obviously completely ridiculous.
No, but what you're saying is, Maggie, to get rid of that, it's what's called a TIC, a taking into consideration. So it sweeps her evidence under the carpet so they can kind of masquerade as a police force that they dealt with.
Well, no, actually, Russell, that's not correct, because everybody in the UK is entitled to know of what they're being accused. They're entitled to a legal representation. They're entitled to have a fair trial. That child didn't even know what was being said about her, and they didn't tell her, because any solicitor worth their salt would have had that thrown out at the very first hurdle. But Greg McGill, who's the head of the CPS now, came to the National Abuse Inquiry and tried to justify that decision. So that shows you how little, he's the head of the CPS, that shows you how little there has been in the change of attitudes up to now. And can I just say, Chris, I know you want to come in, but all the furore this week about Boris Johnson throwing at Keir Starmer, that he let Jimmy Savile off the hook. Now, I'm not even going to comment on that, because that's I don't know the ins and outs. But what I would say is that according to the chief prosecutor from Rochdale, Keir Starmer, when he was director of public prosecutions, sent out to every police force a circular in 2008 saying they shouldn't prosecute these kind of crimes. Now, that's come from the chief prosecutor of Rochdale, Nazir Afzal. I haven't seen that circular, but that was under Keir Starmer's watch. So if you get a Crown prosecutor saying, forget about these kind of crimes, what kind of message is that sending out to police forces?
It's absolutely it is absolutely staggering. Though I do think that actually Nazir Afzal also tweeted, I should say, this week that he was dignified, driven, humble, willing to listen, and his time at the DPP did see a massive improvement in the prosecution of crimes with the most vulnerable victims. I also think that he sent out a defence of him over the Savile specific, but also, it's an absolute fair comment though. If he sent out that circular, it's absolutely horrific that took place. What I will also wonder is, because we've spoken about this a lot in the context of Daniel Pelker, the little boy who was abused and missed by social services. There were these other cases that took place as well. Little Star. There was another one as well, and I shamefully I've forgotten her name. It happened just before Christmas, and there was a big conversation then about how social services and the police, they're not. Perhaps there's a fear. They don't want to be as annoying. They don't want to be as questioning as perhaps they would normally be, because there is a fear that they would be accused of being politically incorrect, that they would be accused of some sort of impropriety. And that must be a big part of this, that there is a real fear that they will be accused of being racist, that social services will be accused of all sorts. There must be a crossover.
I think you're right, Christo. I think individual social workers and police get a lot of stick. But what I would be saying, I mean, if they don't act when they suspect something is wrong, they're leaving that child in a place of danger. I mean, even the wording, taking a child into care, if it wasn't so serious, it actually would be laughable, because you could argue that a child that is taken into care is at far greater risk in many respects than they are when they're left in a home sometimes, which is, cold and they've got no money. But when you see a child that is clearly being physically or sexually abused, you have to act. But when they go into care, I would argue that they are even more vulnerable than they are in a dysfunctional family.
Yeah, I get it.
And this report,
then they are sort of at the...
We're in a system that really doesn't care. I mean, this report talks of one child, and this is typical, going missing 180 times in a year. That is a red flag. And when I was a serving police officer, Christo, that was one of the first signs that things were going wrong. But pretty much every child that is left in a children's home is at risk of being sexually abused. And I would say, speak to anybody who has lived through that care system. It isn't care, it's neglect. And listening to IICSA, to one of they had 3 children, adults now, who gave evidence, and listening to one of those girls, which again is typical, saying that she tried to commit suicide 3 times when she was 12, and she came out of hospital back into that children's home. She said, and this is her words, she said, all I wanted was a hug. I just wanted somebody to put their arms around me and love me. She said, and the staff there were not allowed to. They were not allowed to touch us. The only people who gave us affection was the grooming gangs. And
listen, Maggie, we've got to leave it there because we're over for the news. But listen, I won't stop talking about this. I won't stop covering this story. And sorry, what were you saying?
I just thank you for keeping the spotlight on it, because it is an important issue.
No, you're welcome. And Matt, thank you for coming on. And I know you're going to come in and do the papers in the next few weeks, because we're going to keep you coming on to Talk Radio and discussing this. Maggie Oliver, former detective constable with the Greater Manchester Police. News headlines here on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.